Human anatomy and physiology. Here we are looking at the respiratory system, which is covered in chapter 22 of your textbook. On this next slide, we're looking at the learning objectives for the respiratory system, which really comes down to understanding the structures and functions of the respiratory system, and from a more physiological standpoint, understanding some of the nuances around ventilation and perfusion, and how we can have gas exchange and the transfer of blood gases within our cardiorespiratory system. So here we are in episode 1. So this is very much an introductory lecture looking at the structure of the respiratory system. So what you can see here is an overview slide showing you several of the structures of the respiratory system, and they function primarily to provide oxygen to the body tissues for cellular respiration. In addition, the respiratory system is known to help eliminate waste products such as carbon dioxide, and also thirdly, to maintain acid-base balance. So here we're thinking about pH. There are other portions of the respiratory system that are used for more non-vital type functions. When we think about our different senses, such as being able to sense odors, but also with speech production, and also in facilitating straining, such as during coughing episodes and or during childbirth. Now on the next slide, you will see a table that divides off the two main zones of the respiratory system. So we have a conducting zone and a respiratory zone. And the conducting zone of the respiratory system will include the organs and structures that are not directly involved in gas exchange. And so that is how we make that distinction between, once again, the conducting zone, which really helps to bring air, for example, into the lungs, but does not participate, once again, directly in gas exchange. The gas exchange occurs specifically in the respiratory zone. When we're referring to gas exchange, once again, we're talking about being able to bring oxygen into the body and also being able to eliminate carbon dioxide. And when I spoke about the respiratory system ability to regulate acid-base balance, we're talking about being able to regulate blood pH, and that's through the regulation of carbon dioxide. So the ability to actually eliminate carbon dioxide from the body, that is going to help us, once again, in regulating acid-base balance. So as mentioned, here are the defining structures of the conducting zone versus the respiratory zone. So once again, the conducting zone are those structures listed on the left-hand column from the nose all the way to the bronchioles that are not directly involved in gas exchange. The three structures involved in gas exchange include the respiratory bronchioles, the alveolar duct, and the alveoli. And you can see an enlarged image of the alveoli shown in the screen here. The structure is quite unique in the human body, and that really reflects maximizing surface area such that you can promote gas exchange in those structures. Now on the next slide, we're looking at the thoracic cage, and you can see the major bones, including the sternum, the ribs, and the clavicle. And you can also see some of the major muscles that also contribute when we think about breathing. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on which muscles play a role in breathing on a subsequent slide. But just to highlight a few of the muscles, If you look on the right-hand side of your screen, some of the major muscles include the external intercostals and the internal intercostals. While it may not appear entirely important right now, you can have a look at the orientation of the fibers and the relative positions of those intercostal muscles. So first, the external intercostal muscles, you can see that the muscle fibers run on an angle or in an oblique direction. And you can see that they are the most superficial layer of muscles that occur or exist between adjacent ribs. The internal intercostals also run on an angle or in an oblique fashion, but they are distinctly opposite to that or antagonistic to the external intercostals. That has an implication for when we think about which muscles help with inspiration or bringing air into lungs versus those that help with expiration or being able to eliminate or get rid of air from the lungs. These are more secondary muscles, and I say that as the major muscle involved in breathing is the diaphragm. That's not shown on the screen here, but we will come to it at a later time. Notably, when we look at the overall structure, though, of the thoracic cage, there is some unique features. And so firstly, when we look at the ribs, they have somewhat of an elliptical shape and a unique attachment in that there is an angle of their attachment to the spine. And this allows the thorax to actually help with being able to bring air into the lungs. Notably, the thorax becomes larger when the chest is raised and smaller when it is lowered. So once again, this structure is going to play a major role when it comes to both inspiration and expiration, or bringing air into the lungs and then being able to expire or get rid of that air as well. Now you can see an image looking at the gross anatomy of the lungs. So now we're going into a little bit more detail. Specifically, the lungs are pyramid shaped. They are paired organs in that you have a left side and a right side. They are connected to the trachea by the right and left bronchi respectively. And as I mentioned, one of the major breathing muscles is the diaphragm. And so at the inferior border or surface of the lungs, the diaphragm is a muscle which runs across and separates the thoracic from the abdominal cavity. It is a large fan-like muscle. It's very broad. And it is the major muscle located at the base of the lungs and the thoracic cavity. You may also see it described as dome-shaped. Getting back to the lungs, though, for a minute, the lungs are enclosed by pleura, which are attached to the mediastinum. The pleura are essentially like membranes, helping to divide the tissue of the actual organ versus the structures that surround it. The right lung is shorter and wider than the left lung, and the left lung occupies a smaller volume than the right lung. And this also is owing to the surrounding structure. So if we think about the position of the heart inside of the thoracic region, there is a cardiac notch, which is essentially an indentation that you can see highlighted on the left lung. And that allows space for the heart itself. When we're naming off the lungs and the relative position at the more superior versus the inferior lobes, we also refer to these structures as the apex being most superiorly and the base being most inferiorly. Notably, the lungs, as you are aware, border the ribs. So the ribs really act to protect the lungs as they do perform a vital function. Given that they are responsible for performing gas exchange. We will get into it in a subsequent lecture, but just to be aware that the lungs obviously have a blood supply. In particular, when we think about the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins, they're not shown on the screen here, but the pulmonary arteries play a role in providing deoxygenated blood to the capillaries that form the respiratory membranes with the alveoli. And in contrast, the pulmonary veins return newly oxygenated blood to the heart for further transport throughout the body. These lungs, once again, while not shown on the screen, are also innervated, notably by both the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. And this helps to coordinate bronchial dilation and bronchial constriction of the airways. When we're talking about bronchial dilation, we're thinking about the dilation or the enlargement of the bronchial structures. For example, if you wanted to bring more air into the lungs versus bronchial constriction, which would decrease the diameter of those bronchial structures and restrict the airways. Next, we have here the parietal and the visceral pleura of the lungs. So as I mentioned, each lung is enclosed within a cavity that is surrounded by pleura. Pleura is essentially a serous membrane that surrounds the lungs. And once again, you have a right and a left pleura, which enclose the right and left lungs respectively. You can see them highlighted on the screen here. Just to be clear, the pleura consists of two layers. There is a visceral pleura, and that is the layer that is superficial to the lungs. So it surrounds the actual organ, hence it is known as the visceral pleura. In contrast, the parietal pleura is the outer layer that connects to the thoracic wall, the mediastinum, and the diaphragm. So that is the outer layer that typically is near the outer structures that surround a given organ, versus once again the visceral pleura is the layer that is immediate and in close proximity to the organ itself, in this case being superficial to the lungs. What you'll also notice is a pleural cavity, and there is a space that is between the visceral and parietal layers, known as that pleural cavity. Lastly, I'll just highlight that between the pleura, so between the parietal and the visceral pleura, there is something known as a pleural cavity, or sorry, pleural fluid in the cavity, and that acts as a lubricant. So it allows the lungs to glide across the thoracic wall during breathing, and it also acts in the prevention of pleural separation. It holds the lungs outward and towards the thoracic wall. Couple more slides. We're almost done this first episode, but here are the respiratory centers of the brain. The control of ventilation is quite complex and involves multiple regions in the brain that help to signal the muscles that are used in pulmonary ventilation. This allows for a rhythmic, consistent ventilation rate, and provides the body, therefore, with adequate oxygen while also removing carbon dioxide. Notably, there are two interconnected control centers in the brainstem, which helps to facilitate and generate that basic rhythm of the respiratory cycle, with nerves that affect both inspiration and expiration, the related muscles associated with that. So, for example, with inspiration, we have our diaphragm, our external intercostals, but we also have our internal intercostals as well. And lastly, this is more for your interest, but this highlights, if you go to your textbook and have a look at figure 22.29, how exactly the respiratory system develops. And you are not required to memorize this particular slide, but what you can see in the take-home message really is that the development of the lower respiratory system begins as early as week 4 to week 8 within development.